Daniel had driven for hours that afternoon, the sun dropping behind him as he made his way back to the town where he grew up. He hadn't been home in months. Work had kept him tied to the city, caught up in endless projects and late nights. But when his cousin invited him to the annual family gathering, he couldn't bring himself to say no. There was something about the idea of familiar voices, a crowded dining room, and the smell of roasted food that made him want to come back, even if only for one night. The house stood glowing at the end of the street, light spilling from every window. As Daniel parked and stepped out, the chill of autumn wrapped around him, the kind that hinted winter was not far away. He pulled his coat tighter and headed inside. The moment he opened the door, a rush of warmth, laughter, and the scent of turkey hit him. It felt like stepping into a different world, one far removed from his quiet apartment in the city. Relatives crowded the entryway, greeting him with hugs, pats on the back, and questions about his life. Daniel answered politely, smiling as best he could, though his mind wandered even while conversations went on around him. The room was alive with chatter. Children's footsteps pounding the floor, uncles joking too loudly, and music playing faintly in the background. And then he saw her, Emily. At first, he wasn't even sure it was her. It had been years since he last caught sight of her, back when she had come around as his cousin's friend. She wasn't family. But she had been so close to the family gatherings in those days that it was hard not to think of her as part of the circle. She stood near the dining table, arranging glasses, her hair falling gently over her shoulder. Her laugh cut through the noise, soft yet clear. And it struck him more sharply than anything else in that room. Daniel froze for a heartbeat, and something inside him shifted. He had walked in expecting nothing more than a night of polite conversations and family updates. He hadn't expected her, and now, standing there, he realized just how much presence she carried. She wasn't the same girl he remembered faintly. She was different now, matured, graceful in a way that made it hard to look away. For a moment, their eyes met. Just a second, maybe less. But it was enough. Daniel felt a quiet rush of recognition, a stirring of something he hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't loud or overwhelming, but it was there, tugging at him in a way he couldn't explain. He wanted to walk over, to say something, to ask her how life had been after all these years. But before he could move, someone else called her name from across the room, and she turned away, her laughter following her as she walked out of sight. Daniel blinked, almost as if waking from a dream. He tried to refocus on the conversations happening around him, but his thoughts refused to settle. The family gathering, with all its warmth and noise, suddenly felt like the backdrop to something else entirely. He had come for turkey, laughter, and small talk. But now his heart whispered that the night might hold something unexpected. He carried that thought with him as he stepped further into the house, nodding at familiar faces and answering more questions about work and the city. But deep down, he knew the night had shifted the moment he saw her. He couldn't explain it fully, not yet, but he felt it. Something had begun, and he wasn't sure where it would lead. And as he looked once more in the direction she had gone, Daniel had only one thought circling in his mind. This gathering might change everything. Dinner was in full swing, the table packed with food and voices rising and falling in bursts of laughter. Daniel sat among cousins and uncles, listening to their stories. But his attention kept drifting to the other end of the room where Emily sat. She wasn't loud or demanding, yet she had a way of making the space around her feel brighter. He caught himself watching her more than once, quickly pulling his gaze back whenever someone tried to draw him into conversation. When the meal began to quiet, and people spread out into smaller groups, Daniel finally found himself near her. It wasn't planned, or maybe it was, he wasn't sure. Somehow he had ended up standing by the counter where she was pouring coffee into mugs. "Do you still take it black?" she asked suddenly, glancing at him with a quick smile. Daniel blinked. "Do you remember that?" "Of course," she said softly, handing him the cup. "You always complained sugar ruined the taste." It was such a small detail, yet it made Daniel pause. Years had gone by, and she still remembered. They leaned casually against the counter, the noise of the family fading into the background as their words carried them elsewhere. They talked about work first, her position at a local gallery, his long hours in the city. She told him about her love for painting, how she still found time on weekends to lose herself in colors and brushes. He listened intently, not because the subject was new, but because her voice seemed to draw him in. The conversation shifted naturally, from travels to favorite books, then to small, almost silly things like which coffee shop in town had the best muffins. It felt easy, almost too easy, as though no years had passed at all. But beneath that lightness, Daniel sensed something deeper. Her eyes carried warmth, but there was a trace of something else too, something like sadness that lingered behind her smile. He didn't ask about ITAT, least not yet, but he noticed later. When the living room grew louder with children playing and adults raising their voices over a board game, Emily stepped outside for air. Daniel saw her slip through the door, her figure framed by the porch light. Without thinking too much, he followed. The night was colder than before, a crisp autumn breeze sweeping across the yard. Emily stood on the steps, arms folded as she looked up at the sky. Daniel joined her quietly, their breaths visible in the air. "Clear night," he said softly. "Barely," she replied, pointing at the faint stars. "But I like nights like this. They feel honest." Daniel looked at her, the way her hair shifted slightly in the wind, the way her voice carried a calm that didn't quite match the lively house behind them. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence wasn't awkward, it felt heavy, meaningful, like both were waiting for the other to say something real. She shivered slightly. And without hesitation, Daniel slipped off his jacket. "Here," he offered. Her eyes met his as she accepted it. Her smile, small but genuine. "Thank you." The jacket looked oversized on her, but the sight made something tighten in his chest. He wanted to tell her that he had dismissed her, though he wasn't sure if he even had the right to say it. He wanted to ask why her laughter carried both light and weight, why her eyes seemed to hold unspoken words. But just as he opened his mouth, the door behind them creaked open. A group of cousins spilled out, laughing, carrying cups of cider, breaking the moment instantly. Emily laughed lightly and turned back toward the noise as if nothing had happened. Daniel stood there, his thoughts tangled, his words unfinished. He followed her back inside, but the warmth of the house no longer felt the same. The closeness of that moment outside, the silence, the jacket, the look in her eyes stayed with him. And as the night continued, as conversations and laughter filled the house, Daniel realized something he couldn't ignore. This wasn't just a gathering anymore. It was something else, something he couldn't name yet but felt deep within him. And though he didn't know what to do about it, one thing was clear. He wouldn't forget this night, not with her there. The night stretched on, and the living room slowly shifted from loud chatter to softer tones. Some of the older relatives were gathering near the fireplace, telling familiar stories while the younger ones had disappeared into the basement with games. The energy of the house was changing, and Daniel felt it in the air. He should have been tired after the long day, but his mind refused to rest. It wasn't the family gathering that kept him awake inside. It was Emily. She was in the kitchen now, standing beside his aunt, carefully stacking plates and wiping the counters. Her movements were graceful, unhurried, as though she belonged there. Daniel had offered to help, and soon he found himself beside her, drying dishes while she rinsed. It felt strangely intimate, almost too ordinary, but that was what made it powerful. Every time their hands brushed when passing a plate, every small smile exchanged over the clatter of dishes carried weight. His aunt excused herself after a while, leaving them alone in the kitchen. For a brief moment, Daniel thought about saying something, anything that might explain the restlessness building inside him. He wanted to tell her how seeing her again felt like finding a missing piece. But the words stuck heavy in his chest, refusing to rise. Instead, he asked safe questions about her job, her plans, her favorite part of town. She answered, always with warmth, but there was something quiet in her tone, like she was careful not to let too much slip. From where he stood, Daniel could see his relatives reflected in the window, people laughing, children running, his cousin pouring drinks. Yet all of it felt distant, The only thing real in that moment was Emily, her voice steady as she spoke, her eyes glancing toward him more often than before. And though she smiled, he could sense the same hesitation he felt. As if they were both circling around words that neither dared to release. Time moved quickly after that. Soon the crowd began gathering coats and scarves, saying their long goodbyes at the door. The night was winding down, and Daniel felt a quiet panic settle in. He hadn't said what mattered, and now the chance was slipping away. Emily was near the hallway, helping his cousin gather leftover containers. Daniel stepped toward her, weaving through the noise of relatives hugging and calling out promises to meet again. He rehearsed a dozen words in his head, each one clumsy but honest. "I've missed you. There's something I need to tell you. Can we meet again soon?" But when he finally reached her, all that came out was her name, Emily. She turned, her arms full of containers, her smile soft. Yes. His throat tightened. He saw his family behind her, laughing, hugging, watching. He couldn't bring himself to open his heart in the middle of all that noise. Instead, he forced a smaller truth. One that only scratched the surface of what he felt. "It was really good seeing you again," he said. Her expression softened, her eyes holding his for a moment longer than necessary. "You too, Daniel." She gave him a final smile before turning back to the door. And just like that, she was gone. Her figure disappearing into the night with the others. The house grew quiet again after the last goodbye. But Daniel couldn't shake the hollow feeling in his chest. He had been given a moment, a perfect opening, and he hadn't taken it. The chance was gone, swallowed up by hesitation and fear. As he stood in the silent hallway, the sound of her voice lingered in his memory, along with the weight of what was left unspoken and deep inside. Daniel knew this wasn't the end, but it wasn't the beginning either. It was something in between, fragile and unfinished. A story paused when it had only just started. When Daniel returned to his apartment that night, the city felt colder than usual. He dropped his keys on the counter, loosened his tie, and sat in silence. The hum of traffic outside his window was steady, but his thoughts were anything but calm. Every sound of the family gathering still lived in him, the clinking glasses, the bursts of laughter, the rustle of coats as everyone left. Yet none of those sounds mattered as much as the echo of Emily's voice. Sleep didn't come easily. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind replaying the night in fragments. The way she laughed softly when he handed her a plate, the warmth in her eyes when she accepted his jacket, the pause in her voice when she said goodbye. He turned from side to side, restless, wondering if she too was awake somewhere, caught in the same haze of memory. It was a thought both comforting and tormenting. Days slipped into weeks, but Daniel couldn't shake the memory. Work demanded his focus, yet during meetings or late-night emails, his mind drifted. A phrase she used, the tilt of her smile, the way her hair shifted in the wind, these details came back without warning, as though his heart refused to let go. It wasn't simply attraction. He had known attraction before, and this was different. This was something that lived deeper, something that made him question why he had stayed silent when it mattered most. One evening, as he walked home through the city streets, Daniel passed a cafe and stopped in his tracks. The smell of coffee carried him back to the moment Emily had handed him a cup at the gathering. Remembering exactly how she teased him about refusing sugar, he smiled faintly, then felt the weight of regret press against him. Why hadn't he asked her to meet again? Why had he let fear decide for him? The following weekend, he drove back to his cousin's town under the excuse of a visit. He didn't say it aloud, but deep inside, he hoped to see her again. He lingered during the afternoon, listening for her name, waiting for some sign that she might appear. But she didn't. His cousin mentioned her briefly, saying she was busy with work at the gallery, and though Daniel nodded politely, disappointment sank into him. That night, alone in his guest room, he admitted a truth to himself. One evening had changed him. He hadn't expected it, hadn't planned for it, but the gathering had become a turning point. Emily was no longer a memory from years ago. She was present in his thoughts, constant and alive. Even when she wasn't there, the weeks that followed did not dull the feeling. If anything, it grew stronger. Sometimes, while sipping his coffee in the morning, Daniel would imagine what it would be like to share those quiet hours with her. Other times, walking through the crowded city, he would see someone with the same shade of hair or hear laughter that reminded him of her. And his chest would tighten. He wondered if she thought of him, too. Did she remember the jacket he had draped over her shoulders? Did she think about their shared silence on the porch? Or had she already tucked the memory away, moving on with her life while he was left replaying it? The uncertainty gnawed at him, yet it also kept him hopeful. One night, unable to sleep, Daniel sat by his window with a notebook. He began to write not a letter, not exactly, but thoughts that poured out faster than he could catch them. He wrote about the family gathering, about how her smile had changed the way he saw the night, about the weight of words left unspoken. The pages filled quickly, and though he never sent them, the act of writing eased the ache. Still, the longing remained. He knew he couldn't keep circling around the memory forever. Something had to change. Either he would reach out and see if the feeling was shared, or he would carry it silently and let it become one of those stories people keep locked away. Wondering what might have been, as autumn gave way to winter, Daniel realized the truth. The family gathering was over, but in his heart, it was only the beginning. He couldn't stop thinking about her. Not because of what had happened, but because of what had almost happened. The unfinished moment, the words he hadn't spoken, that was what haunted him. And as he sat in his apartment, watching the first snowfall of the season dust the city streets, he whispered to himself what he hadn't dared to say out loud before. I can't stop thinking about her. The memory of that night would not fade. It was no longer just a memory, it was a promise, a reminder that some stories don't end in one evening. Some linger, waiting for the courage to be written fully. And Daniel knew, with quiet certainty, that this was one of them.